Next speaker, and I'm going to take a couple minutes to read something about him. He's going to be speaking to you for the next hour, and his name is Dave Summitt. He is a highly accomplished cybersecurity executive with extensive experience in leading and managing cybersecurity programs, and he's received industry recognitions for his involvement with initiatives that demonstrate thought leadership and outstanding business value. He is currently the Vice President of Cybersecurity for the Florida Cancer Specialists and Research Institute, where he is responsible for continuous development and maintaining the cybersecurity program. So we are really thrilled to have Dave here. He's also volunteered to be the panel moderator at the end of the day, so thank you, Dave. So he's going to go for an hour, and I think you've left room for Q&A as well, correct? Okay, awesome. So without further ado, come on up, Dave.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I know I recognize a lot of faces, and I know a lot of you don't know me. So the bigger question when I go to conferences is, what am I going to get out of what the speakers have to say? And I can tell you that as a speaker, it's very difficult to come up with topics. Even in this broad field, it's very, very difficult. Because number one, you don't know how your audience is going to take the topic you're bringing up, right? So, and I'm getting ready to bring you a talk that I've worked on for almost 2 months, and I hope it shows, but I haven't got myself convinced it's going to show, because the reason I'm saying that is this particular topic is something is not like any other security conference you've probably been to, because the topic is going to be something very, very simple. In fact, I ran it by my wife the other day, which now just got to excuse me here a minute because I got my phone here, and I can guarantee you when I'm in places that's very important, I'm in meetings and stuff, undoubtedly my wife will end up texting me in the middle of it. She has this uncanny knack of doing this, and I think it's part of her tech challenge problem that she has. So let me turn down my phone because I know it's going to happen. Okay, that out of the way. I'm supposed to be here for an hour, but there's another thing that particular me from a keynote speaker address. I don't know about you, but when someone talks for an hour, it's way too long. So I'm not talking for an hour. I'm going to go for 2. Okay, not really. It's probably going to be more like a 20 to 25 minute talk. And then I thought for the better part of the last part of the hour, I would rather just kind of open it up and start Q&A. Because I find that in most conferences, when you get participation from the audience and you got them engaged, they end up taking more out of it than just the talk itself. So in this particular case, again, as I mentioned, this is not going to be your standard cybersecurity talk. So before I even get started with that, I want to know who's in my audience. So I'm going to start off this way. How many of you are in cyber leadership in your organization? Just a quick show of hands. Okay, who all is in the technical side of running the cyber program? Okay, good mix. Now, who in here is not in cyber, but they're in information technology? How many of those people do we have? Good, because I'm going to be your best friend today. This talk is about you all and not the cyber people. In fact, I have no intentions of disrespecting any of the cyber people here because I'm a cyber guy, right? I'm Cyber Dave. I've been known that from close friends for quite a while. So, and the reason I say that is because what I'm going to be bringing up is something about fundamentals, the very basics. I think it's something that we all have a tendency to forget because of everything that we've got going on. So as I recalled some of the conferences that I've attended since COVID, and this is kind of why I started off on this topic and why I'm starting to go forward with this particular idea and trying to help organizations and help others when I speak with them, is that at the conferences that I've been, and I don't know how many of you have been to conferences, and I'm really glad to get back to conferences since COVID, but how many of you have been at conferences where it seems like you walk out and it's the same thing as the last conference I attended? There's nothing new that's been presented. I didn't learn very much more. And it's like, I was getting tired of that. I was like, what is happening to us? I mean, it really, we start, how much can we talk about passwords? You know, we talk about, make sure they're complex, but don't make them too complex because they're going to write them down. Or change them often, or don't change them often. Go for 90 days, go for 1 year. And it just keeps, it seems to me like it's the same cycle over and over about the topics we're talking about. We talk about cloud security. Everybody, I mean, it's almost every one of them. There's, at some point, you're going to have a session about cloud security. Here's a good one. It's not if you've been breached, it's when you get breached. We all know that. So why are we talking about it still? Or at least having a whole session on that, because we already realize that, right? So what are some of the other topics that kind of almost always come up? Here's a good one that I've always enjoyed having a conversation with. The CISO's not reporting to the right person in my organization. How many would you hear that often, right? So what's the real answer for all that? How long have we been talking about where a CISO should report? Have we gained any ground on that? Is it changing? Some places you could say yes, some places you're not. It's not changing. Another good topic is we can't get management buy-in, although it's extremely important that we're supposed to be getting management buy-in in what we're trying to initiate, right? What are some of the other topics here? Multi-factor. I hope all of you have multi-factor, because if you don't, you're going to get it at some conference in the future that you should have multi-factor, right? But then you've got other sectors or other pieces of people in the industry that are telling you, even if you go multi-factor, it's not really protecting you if you don't have it deployed right. True, but that's going to go with anything that you get. If you don't deploy it right, it's not going to work right. And that's kind of the basis of where I'm going to go with this. So, just when we think we've heard it all, now along comes ChatGPT. It's like, I thought my head was going to explode the first several months that ChatGPT hit the market, because it was like, that's probably one of the fastest topics, I think, that just caught by wildfire across the globe. All of a sudden, they brought it out, they introduced it, and the next thing I know, I'm talking just a few weeks later, you got companies, we're implementing ChatGPT. Or in my case, I'm healthcare, and I've got doctors calling me saying, we want to use ChatGPT. And I'm like, well, what do you want to use it for? And it's like, well, they just want to use it because it's new tech. Don't get me wrong, I'm a techie. I love tech work. And I like new stuff too, but I'm also very cautious, and that's probably the cyber side in me, very cautious about implementing new tech when it comes right out the door. And I think we all should be cautious, at least until we understand what it does. And for me, in the AI world right now, I'm really, really cautious, because number one, half the people out there that say they know what AI is don't know what AI is. And I'm going to tell you one of them. I don't know exactly what AI is. I'm still learning myself. I've got a son that went to computer science at Purdue, and he was in the AI department there and was doing some AI work and was thinking about going back for his master's in AI. And I've sat and had a lot of conversations with him. And he said the funniest thing about all this is AI gets confused with machine learning. Everybody just gets it completely backward. What is it really? Is it machine learning, or is it artificial intelligence? So even in our own field, if we don't understand it completely, number one, how do we use it right? And number two, how do we secure it? Because if we don't understand it, we can't secure it. So we have to, at least at some point, get in time to do that. But let's get back here to what my talk is all about. And here's my disclaimer. With everything that I just said about getting kind of inundated with topics at conferences, I'm going to be the first to say, I don't know everything, nor will I ever know everything. And if anybody ever tells you that they're in cyber and they know everything about all the fields of cyber, turn around and walk away from them, because they're just BSing you, right? You're just not going to know it. It's impossible. It's too wide a range. So what gives me the qualifications to sit up here and talk to you? Because I can guarantee you, I've had issues, and I think there's kind of a problem with people that want to get up and speak, and they get to that point, and they know they're going to be in a room full of people, and by the way, when you're talking to a room full of people that's in your field, that's a whole lot harder than talking to a room full of people that's not in your field, because I can guarantee you, if I say something wrong here today, it's going to be on my LinkedIn post tomorrow. Someone's going to call me out on it. And I don't want that. So I'm disclaiming right now, I don't know everything there is to know. My specialty that I feel like I have done very well in with my career is how to build a program in an organization and get it running. That's where I am. Now, I am technical. I started my field with the Defense Department and Department of the Navy way back in 1983, back when my hair wasn't gray. I have 3 employees that's under me setting a table over here, and we were talking about that with my picture up here. Oh, and by the way, the little animation guy I got here, that's me. And I want you to, who are Rays fans in here? Tampa Bay Rays. You all know that pose, right? Randy Rosarina, right? I want you to know I had that before he did. That avatar is almost 2.5 years old, so it was before he started making it popular. So here's the point. There's a couple of points that I want you all to take from here. The first one is that when we are in a problem within cyber, when we have our issues in cyber and we can't seem to get over a problem, sometimes we need to look outside of ourselves, outside of our group, actually even outside of our field to go look for a solution, because that's where it's going to come from. It's going to be that insight that someone else from a different perspective has on you. So here's kind of the way it is. There's one specific insight that I had, and it was about as recent as 2 years ago, roughly 2 years ago, that I was trying to mature a program in a company that we just weren't getting anywhere. I would have an outside company come in and do maturity assessments along with my risk assessments against our security program, because I wanted to see how my program was stacking up and what it was learning, and if we were gaining ground from one year to the next year. And when I did that, it became evident that we were making ground. So I started the maturity assessments a year after I started the program, so I could see where I could baseline where we were. And year after year, we started climbing in the maturity level. But we got to a place where I'm like, this isn't where I want to be. I'm halfway up my maturity level. Why can I not get any further than that? And I got very frustrated. And my team that was working with me at the time got frustrated with me because I was frustrated with them. We were still trying to figure out why we couldn't reach a plateau, why we couldn't cross a plateau. And it wasn't until about 1.5 years after my last assessment that our CIO at the time decided to do a maturity assessment on the IT department. So what happened was we got that information, and when it came back, it showed that the maturity of the IT department we were working with was at a level 1 out of a level 5. They were considered a very immature IT department. That's when it hit me. How can I secure an organization with an immature IT security department? Right? So my maturity is going to heavily depend upon the IT department itself. So that almost was a whole paradigm shift in my thinking. I really thought I could come in and create a great security program and secure the organization and be as protected as we possibly could. And I quickly realized, because I can't get any better than what we were doing, it wasn't us. It was the overall IT department. What's going on there? So that kind of got me thinking, how do we advance our own IT department? And this is where you guys that are not in the security field in IT, and I'm sure we've probably got some directors of IT here, this is where I'm going to help you guys out a lot, because I can get, actually, I'm going to get off, you never get off track of your talk, but I'm going to get off track here for just 1 second. I think I saw a badge with someone as an IT director here. Can you raise your hand? I'm not going to put you on the spot. Oh, so I got 2 of them here. Let me ask you this quick question. What do you think of your cyber team when they keep pushing the vulnerabilities your way and say you have to go get this fixed? What's your immediate reaction to that? Can you handle it? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So where I end up thinking about this is, and what's happened to me, and it's happened several times, the organizations that I've been in is I will get called in to who I report to or someone higher, and they'll say, okay, we've got this perception that you guys, all the cyber team's doing is finding out all of our problems, and you're just giving the problems to the IT department. You're not telling us what we need to do to fix it. And I'm like, well, number one, that's not our job to fix it. But then again, I'm thinking, you know what? When I ran into this problem about the maturity of the IT department, I quickly realized that, okay, if they're not getting it done and they're immature in this and we have the knowledge, why are we not helping them fix the problem? So that was like a big shift in my thinking. And that's where I'm kind of going with the very end of what I've got going. So here's what I want to begin. I want to level set with you and start going down a road of different types of thinking. So as this image is coming up, I want you to take a really quick look at it. And some of you may have seen these before and some of you may not. But the question I'm going to ask you is, when you look at this image, what do you see? A rabbit? Everybody see a rabbit? What about those that see a duck? All right, here's my question. How can we all look at the same image and see two different things? Right? So how does that happen? So here's an explanation, or at least an attempt at an explanation. A Cornell University psychologist did a study and brought some volunteers into the organization because he was trying to figure out something that would explain like this. And what they did was they brought some volunteers in, set them down at a computer, and they were going to be given a reward of a glass of orange juice or a very bad tasting smoothie. So that was the two awards. What they had to do during the computer game was they were going to be they were told that they in the computer game was going to ask them to give them a number, and the other half of the volunteer group was said, in your computer game that you're getting ready to play, you're going to be asked to identify a letter. And they were given this image. Guess what happened? Everybody that wanted the right award and were told, give me a letter, what did they see? A B. Everyone that said, give me a letter, what did they see? 13. All right? So here's the point about that. Michael Michalko. Anybody know the author of Michael Michalko? He's the writer of Thinker Toys and Creative Thinker Toys. And in that, he says that these experiments suggest that as an observer, what the world that we see is pretty much based on what we want to see, right? And it's all based on what our own perceptions are and what we are an expert in the field in. So we automatically have blinders on and I'm going to speak specifically now to the cyber people again. We have blinders on because we're looking at it from a cybersecurity perspective, right? The IT department, the rest of the IT department's not looking at it from a cybersecurity perspective. They're looking at it from an end user perspective and keeping the organization working. So already we have two different views of the same picture, right? And that's the problem that I'm trying to bring up. So as I was discovering this, I was like, okay, I'm starting to get a picture that maybe my team shouldn't be just identifying problems with IT. Maybe we need to be going out and helping some of the IT departments with this. So here's another example. We all know what this is, right? The question I'm going to ask you is, which way is that plane going? Is it going away from you or is it coming toward you? Now, a lot of you are going to immediately think the thing was going away from me. But some of you are going to say it's coming toward you, right? Again, same image, you're seeing something completely different. So as I was kind of going through this whole idea, it was like, okay, what do I need to learn through this? Because I was picking this information up for a lot of books that I read, and I honestly read 2 or 3 books at a time. And at the end of this presentation, I'll give you my top 10 that I've already have for the year, and I hope that you kind of pick at least 1 or 2 of them out there and read on this. But here's another old one. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this one before. So when you're looking at this picture, do you see the old lady that's looking down like she's having some issues? Well, what about the young lady that's looking away? You see that? Does everybody see those 2 different things? Machako also says that the perception of the observer depends on our own assumptions, our own perceptions, right? It's what you want to see is what you're going to see. And we have to accept that fact that that much of what we seems real to us is all based on our perceptions. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we need to think about not so much of what we're trying to get accomplished in the cyber field, but how can we better make the organization and raise the level of assistance and maturity of the IT world we're trying to secure, because we do get wrapped up, right? So when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at seem to change. That's the main point that I want to get right here. So what's this all have to do with fundamentals? Well, that's actually the secondary point that I wanted to bring up. I want you to understand that we all have our own perceptions, and our perceptions are based on what we do. So think about that as we move forward, and then I'll get to more of the point of the fundamentals. And all of this is about focus. It's about what we focus on. And this leads in to apply to that insight that I had about, okay, the IT department's not mature, right? So what am I going to do? I read a post on LinkedIn the other day from a new LinkedIn guy that I've got, and I really appreciate his post. And I think some of you probably have heard this, but he called and he made a post that he has a very serious medical condition, and it was called the shiny object syndrome, right? And he was making the case that we all have the shiny object syndrome. And what he was basically saying is we get so wrapped up in looking at the shiny new object, we fail to see what we're really trying to accomplish. And I think that's happening in our cyber world today as well. We've probably got more cyber, now I'm not disparaging our vendors at all, but we probably got more vendors with more products today than we've ever had in the security field in any point in time in history, right? They're everywhere, and everybody sees a niche, so there's a new company that pops up. And we all like sexy, right? We all like to do the sexy thing. That's one of the things that appeals to me about cybersecurity is it's really cool because there's a lot of things that we do, we see, we can do. But when we try to implement products, it's because we're looking at the shiny new object that's being presented in front of us, right? And that's a problem because there's no tech in the world that can be developed or be sold to you that's going to fix your problem if the underlying issues, you've got a fundamental basic issue going on. Tech cannot fix fundamental issues, right? That's what we need to be looking at. So when you're asking yourself questions, I go out and spend $400,000 or $500,000 on a new product. What am I really buying to fix what I'm trying to fix? And did I look at the problem of why I have the issue to begin with? And in a lot of cases, I would almost dare say that you could probably fix it from a basic standpoint first. And then when you brought your product in, you've elevated what you're doing. You've not used the tech to fix the problem. You've made it even greater than what it could have been if you hadn't have done the fundamental correction at the start of it. So we do all of our product evaluations, we do our risk assessments, we do all these other kinds of assessments, and that's what happens is we get off on this shiny object syndrome. So in most cases, I think we cyber professionals and vendors and educational institutes, these three populations, we have formulated a very serious, flawed assumption. And that assumption is that we're operating over top in a mature organization. So think about that. And that's kind of where I was going with this whole fundamentals thing. If you feel like you're not getting anywhere in your company with your program, look at the maturity level that you're trying to apply the program at and see what you can do to help and assist. So patches, for instance. Let's go down that route of vulnerability, because again, this is one area that is probably every pain point of every cyber team there is you don't get the patches done fast enough, right? Well, my belief now is what would the ideal world look like if you were walking into an organization where every server, every computer that they even put into the environment was already fully patched and kept up to date when the patches were released? What would it look like? What would it look like if your applications and your software development people were actually as they were developing, was documenting their code, and they were actually testing for vulnerabilities in their code before they even got it to release? These are all basics. This is fundamental basics, but we have a tendency to not do that because we want to push it out so fast. And that's what's happening with the new tech that's coming out today. We push it out so fast that the right security levels has not been created and not been done, and we get it pushed out, and now all of a sudden we got another issue we got to battle. So what about the deployment of, what would it look like if you brought up a new IoT device on the network or a printer on the network that's already been through hardening. It's not even allowed to go on the network until the hardening happens. Again, it's another very fundamental thing that should be done in the IT world. So whose responsibility is all of this? And why is it seemingly left to the cybersecurity area to point out all the problems when they shouldn't have been there to begin with? Okay, just think about that one. What about your CMDB? Who in here, I'm going to put you on the spot, who in here has a fully functional, efficient CMDB in their organization? And what I mean by CMDB, I'm talking about their management database of all the assets that are on their network. Nobody's raised their hand. And I can guarantee you, no matter what conference I go to, I'm going to get the same response. And I can't even raise my hand because it's always a battle. Nobody wants to do that. And I suggest to you that the reason they don't do that is because it's not sexy. It's not the shiny object. It's work. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time to get it done. So, did I just miss something, or did I kind of go forward there? I think I did. Okay, that flawed assumption. Good. I didn't do that. So if something is not fundamentally correct, again, I'm going to reiterate this because I think it's important for us to remember and take out of here. You need to fix it before you add tech to it. You need to fix it before you add cyber controls to it, right? So let's go talk about the fundamentals. What are these fundamentals? We all know this as three things: people, processes, and technology, right? Those are the three fundamental areas that we got to work with. So that's what we're going to talk about real quick. So if you evaluate all of the problems, let's say, we're always hearing or always reading stories about the data breaches that occur. And here's a sobering fact about all these breaches that occur. And this is just more data that's going to shore up my argument on this. If you look at all those breaches that have occurred over the last several years and any cyber incidents that are going to come up, ultimately they release, here's what happened. They don't give you the full details, but they do give you enough to understand what might have happened. Every one of them, every one of those cyber incidents is a breakdown of fundamentals. It wasn't a breakdown of security that was put around it. It was a breakdown of the fundamentals. Most likely, there's three things that happen. is an unremediated vulnerability that hasn't been patched. That's fundamental, right? The other thing is, or you may have a people problem. Someone did something they shouldn't have done, and why did they do that? And in most cases, most of these are unintentional actions that are occurring, which means that the user's not trained correctly. Again, back to fundamentals, right? So in the process area, that's the patching. The technology area may be that we've deployed something that we weren't ready for, and we didn't get it hardened in time, which again should be your fundamental basis of deploying any hardware tech. So in hindsight on all this, they could have been avoided. Almost every breach, and I would dare say 99.9% of all breaches and security incidents that we hear about in the news could have been avoided if the fundamental thing had been done. Because you're always going to hear that at the end of the story. It got breached because someone did something wrong or they didn't patch a vulnerability. So let's talk about people for a minute. We always hear, what's the one thing we hear about people in the cyber world? I know you all know this one. They are the weakest link, right? And we've been told this repeatedly over and over and over, to almost to the point where we fully believe that they are the weakest link. Well, I'm going to suggest to you something a little bit different. If they're the weakest link, why is it that all of our resources, time, and effort and money is not spent on educating our users? If we know they're the problem, why are we not focusing on the problem? Because it's not the shiny new object, right? So this is where I firmly believe this, that in any cyber program, one of the number one things that should be done in any cyber program is a security awareness training program. Now, I was appalled a few years ago. I remember getting into some arguments at some conferences about one guy had an idea that, and he flat out said it in front of everyone, security awareness training in an organization is a waste of money, time, and effort. And I had people out there that was actually agreeing with that statement. I'm like, well, wait a minute. You're telling me they're the weakest link, they're the problems here, but you're telling me it's not worth the effort of training them, or at least keeping them aware of what the problems are? It just didn't make sense to me. It sounded like just really flawed thinking. And I'm like, maybe these are the same people that they're throwing the keys at their 16-year-old and say, here you go, now you're 16, you can go drive. Like, don't you go train that 16-year-old before you allow them to get behind the wheel, or at least you're in there helping them? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, it really is some flawed thinking. So this is exactly, but doing something like that is exactly what we do with our users. We literally give them the credentials to our critical assets and our keys to the kingdom, and we don't train them, right? So that's why I have always maintained that one of the cornerstones of a cyber program better be your security awareness training. And I'm not talking about phishing them only. I'm not talking about just bringing them in at the beginning of their employment cycle and giving them a quick rundown of what cybersecurity is. That's not the training I'm talking about. I'm talking about keeping them informed on a weekly basis of what the problems can be, why you don't want to be clicking links in emails, why email is our number one threat vector for social engineering. They need to know that. They need to know when we have a specific target coming into your organization, your users need to know that. They are the frontline defense. And see, now I'm finding myself, we all know this already. I'm finding myself going back to that very first statement that I made. It's the same thing we hear over and over and over again, right? And I don't mean to do that, but it really is true that we sit here and we try to say they're the weakest link, but we don't do anything to fix it. So number one, that's the people side of this house. So let's go to technology for a minute. Why do we deploy computers and servers without patching them, without hardening and providing hardening? I think you're all starting to see my point about all of this harder stuff is because it's not a sexy thing to do. It's not a fun thing to do. And it's not the shiny new object thing to do. So I had talked to one IT security director about an issue they were having, and I said, "Well, why did you deploy it that way? You know, what was going on? Why did you deploy it that way?" And the response came back was, "Well, it would have, if we deployed it this way, it was going to cause a lot of pushback of our users, and the decision was made to not do that." So my point was on that, and I was talking to him about it, was, so what you're saying is you made a compromise between security and usability. And how many of us have heard this, that security should be a compromising organization, right? We should give in to the usability of our users. Well, I'm going to tell you that that's not true. That is absolutely not true. And I will have discussions and arguments with leaders about this all the time. Security is not a 50-50 guarantee. It is not a 50-50 proposition. If and my point is, you're either going to do security or you're not going to do security. So if you're giving in to security aspects on something you're trying to get deployed, in effect, you just gave up your security. So you need to be hard and fast on this. Now, I will say, as a leader side of this, there are times you're going to get that pushback from, it's going to go up the chain, and someone up the chain is going to say, "No, we're going to make this this way, and your security is going to get compromised." Here's my experienced response to that. Make sure you go write that down, that you do not agree with that decision. That's a CYA action. Okay, I've experienced that. And it does help in the long run, because at that point, if something does go wrong, you've got something to fall back on, and you document why you don't agree with that. Don't just say, "I don't agree with it." Put it in there why you don't agree with it. So when it really hits the fan, you've got that information, say, "This is why we shouldn't have done this in the first place." Because it's really amazing to me how we kind of do things that at one point it'll take us, it may take us an extra week to get something done correctly. And if you add that time it took and how much money it took in that 1 week to do that, compared to the cyber incident that occurs down the road or the data breach, and you compare that cost between the other one, no comparison. Excuse me. So let's go to the processes. Excuse me, I'm getting dry here. I could probably ask another question here, and I know the answer I'm going to get. How many of the organizations, and how many of you, and this is rhetorical, you don't have to raise your hand, how many of you have really good documentation, formal processes, formal procedures, formal plans written for the programs you're developing? And there are a few in here. That's good. That's excellent, because that is the fundamentals. And once you start fundamentals, you're gonna find that your fundamentals are gonna carry you an awfully long way, long before a shiny new object or a shiny new security control comes into your organization. It's going to carry you a long, long way. So the problem with processes that in most organizations is that we don't have formal processes. And what I mean by not a formal process is, I'm going to go back and pick on patching again. I can almost guarantee you that all of you do patching, but do you do it in a formal fashion? Do you have SLAs set, and are you meeting those SLAs? If you don't meet the SLAs, do you go back and do a root cause of why the SLA wasn't met? And write up, because here's the thing, and this goes back to the risk people in the room. If you don't patch that in the time frame that you're supposed to patch that should be now showing up on your risk register. And somebody in your organization needs to be signing off on that risk. How many of us have that formal process in place? Good. I want to come and work for you. So all of these issues, and when it comes to processes, if they're not carried out correctly, the fundamental parts of processing and having plans and procedures in place, one of the first things I do when I create a program, the very first thing I do after I've evaluated what we've got, is I go write a cybersecurity management program plan. I write it out. Because in that plan, I'm identifying all my gaps, all my areas that I know need to be corrected, and I'm putting in there when I want it fixed and what I'm planning on doing to put it in place to get it fixed. Then I take that plan and I go up to my next level, whoever I'm reporting to, and I hand them that plan and said, here's what we've got to do, here's the plan to make it done, I want the feedback. Because at that point, now I've got those people that in the upper management looking at something written down, and if they don't agree, then I can at least ask why. Why don't you agree? What can we do to make this happen? But that's your first step in getting that risk acceptance area too, because now I have something written down that if they're not going to follow out and carry out, you've got them on the hook saying we're not going to follow that. Yeah, that's the very first thing. But it really does give you a guideline. It allows you to move forward with things. So again, all these things I've been talking about is fundamentals. So it's people, security awareness, policies, procedures, our processes are all in the policies and the plans and the procedures are all in the process side, and the technology about how we're handling how we're handling hardware. So I brought this one up here because a couple of weeks ago, I've got a son that's in Alabama, and we were helping him buy a house. And I got a structural engineer to come in and I wanted him to evaluate a certain area of the house that we were purchasing, and he gave me a report, and this kind of fell right in line with what my thinking was, because this is what he wrote. Have you ever lived or worked in a building that had foundation problems? Unstable foundations cause brick cracks, interior wall cracks, sloped floors, door and window operation problems, and lead to expensive repairs. And he went on to say, in our daily work environment, I regularly evaluate damaged foundations and develop repair plans and methods for stabilizing them. While most can be effectively repaired, it's safe to say that in almost every case, better planning and more robust construction methods would have averted much heartache and expense. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, that sounds like cybersecurity, right? So there goes back to what my first premise was when I said, if you're in a position where you're in a rut, sometimes if you look outside of your own expertise, you look outside of cyber, you even look out of IT and see what others are facing, you might come up with some kind of a solution. Everybody faces this same problem of foundations. And in building, foundation is critical to the success of a good building. And that's with life as well. If you don't have a good foundation in your own life, you're going to have all kinds of problems. So I'm going to end with these couple of quotes that I think are really important. First, master the fundamentals. Larry Bird. Everybody probably knows who Larry Bird is, even if you're not an NBA or basketball fan, right? Larry Bird, this was so important to him that did you know that before every practice, he would go out and shoot 500 shots even before practice every morning. That's how much the fundamentals meant to him. The one I like the most is by Michael Jordan. Get the fundamentals down, and the level of everything you do will rise. That's the main point that I want to make you all understand here from a cyber standpoint and an IT standpoint. Why do we in cyber not go ahead and say, let's take it a step further and make this a partnership effort with our IT folk and help them fix the things instead of just saying, here's our problem, right? So that's my main point. I have no idea how long I just went. Probably 30 minutes. That's long enough. Now what we can do is kind of move into some other things. So before I do that, I got to do a quick list or a shameless plug here of my podcast. I do have a podcast, and it started about a year ago during just right out of COVID. I would appreciate it if you kind of go check those out. I've had some fantastic people on that podcast, and we did 13 episodes over the year, getting ready to start season 2. But I would really appreciate it a lot if you guys could kind of write that down and just go check out a couple of them. More importantly, if you do go check out some, I would absolutely love it if you would give me feedback on the one you listen to, because I want to make it better, and I can only do that if I get the feedback. Okay? So I mentioned earlier that we'd start talking, or I read a lot of books. Here's the books that I recommend that you read. Here's my top 10 for the year. I'm not gonna read it all off on here, but so if you want, you can take a quick snapshot of that. Some really good people there, and several of these people actually are interviewed on the podcast too, so we talk about that. Okay, so here we are with the question and answers section. You all got that microphone ready to go? Perfect. I'm not going to give you psychiatric help, but if you feel like I did, I'm going to say that the 5 cents, you can have an IOU on me. I don't care. It doesn't matter. But this is the Q&A time, so I'd like to go ahead and see it just kind of opened up, and maybe we can have some discussions. I got a guy here, right here. We'll get to you in a second.
All right, so on the security awareness training, which I agree with, by the way, how do you prevent users from just ignoring it to the point where, oh, they're up here talking again, covering the same subjects and so on, especially when they're being overwhelmed with other training from safety and compliance, other departments that also have to get their time in. We do it on a regular basis, monthly, but get maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
So one of the issues that I run into with cyber security awareness training programs is, number one, you've definitely got to get the buy-in of the rest of the organization, because the first thing they'll tell you is we don't have time to do this. We just can't afford our people sitting down listening to a presentation for a while. They've got their jobs to do. So it's really important to go ahead and get that buy-in from leadership. And part of that, I think, is critical, is that everybody in the organization understands that even your executives are now doing this, because you can't build a good program if your executives aren't taking the training. That's one of the first things that I learned really quick, that the users are seeing what their executive leaders are doing. And if they're saying the executive leaders aren't doing this, why do we have to do this? That's the very first thing. The second thing is, find a good awareness training company. Don't try to do this by yourself, because there's so much to be covered that you need, and this is kind of what I'm saying, go out and get outside of your own area and help with someone that's actually focused on doing something like that for you. You've got to make it relevant, you got to make it interesting, but it all depends on your company, your culture, what do they accept, because I have seen some really good security awareness training that is nothing but videos, and they're like 15-minute videos, and they're in like sitcom situations. So you have a whole season of the one theme running through sitcom series, right? I've seen that work really well, and I've seen that really fail, because it depends on the culture of your organization. What do they want to know? But more importantly, is don't overwhelm them with nothing but training. And I up until a few years ago was not a proponent of phishing my organization. The only reason is because when I'm fished, they're already getting fished. They're already getting all this. And if you're doing your job in a training situation, you're already made them aware that they've got this stuff coming in, and you're trying to do that in your training, that this is what they need to do. So my whole point was, why am I going ahead and throw more phishing out there? Now, I will say that I've been convinced that there's some value to phishing in an organization, because now you got metrics to go on, and you can actually see who the people that are not getting it. And then you start targeting people that aren't getting it instead of blanket. I mean, if you've got a good phishing campaign on and you're keeping metrics, then why do I want to keep you if you've never been a threat to me in my organization? That you're passing everything that's coming through and not having any. However, if you're the one that's sitting there and click every time I have a phishing campaign, and you're the one clicking the link, what am I doing wrong and not educating you, right? Now, that's an idealistic thought, and I think it's okay, but you also have to remember there's going to be some people that are just going to do it, even in a phishing, and they'll know it's a phishing, and they're just going to click it anyway. And those are the ones that you've really got to pay attention to. But again, the other thing I didn't drive on here that I think is important is going back on policies. Make sure your organization has a good set of security policies. Not only just having the policy, but making sure there is an enforcement layer to the policy. Don't push the policy just to go punish people. Push the policy so they're following what they're supposed to be doing. Okay? Next question.
Yes. I know that a lot of the big leaders of tech companies have actually asked to push a pause on AI, and I know that a lot of the SOCs are using AI. So my question is how do we vet the SOCs and how they actually use the AI?
You just had to go there, didn't you? That's one I wish I had an answer to, because I think we're all thinking about that. Again, AI has come out so fast, so rapidly, that we don't fully understand it, and you can't secure something you fully don't understand. So I think in my case, I've got a partnership with a company that's doing our SOC work as well, and they do AI in some of their stuff. At some point, there's got to be a level of trust to who you're working with. And if they give any indication that something didn't work right, that's when you go back to them. Now, I can't give you a set answer on this because I don't know. It is something I'm still working out with. But again, what it is in our field is, and I've asked my company this, I've asked the partner that I have, is it really AI or is it machine learning? Because there is a big difference. And in right now, if any of you don't understand the difference between AI and machine learning, please go look that up, because it is a major difference between the two. Most cases, what those solutions are is not AI, it's machine learning. And that's really, and I'm okay with using machine learning as long as those algorithms have been proven to work. You get so used to a SOC and you see the alerts that are coming in, and if you're reviewing your analyst team and everything that they've been seeing, you get to a point where you realize that they missed something that they really should have picked up. Now the question is, who really missed it? Did the software that you've got going miss it, or did the analyst miss it? And that would be two different issues. So I really wish I had a great answer for that one, but I don't. I don't know the answer to that one. It's too new. It's just too new. Other questions? Yes.
So you spoke about your cybersecurity management program plan and how you use that to propose the risk acceptance as the first step of proposing your risk acceptance. When is that risk acceptance threshold kind of revisited in an organization? So, like from between the time you first go into a company and then those people, processes, and new technologies are implemented, when do you go and revisit the risk acceptance with upper leadership and say, hey, I think we need to either revise this, or I think you need to take a second look at this and reevaluate your risk acceptance?
Good question, and I'm going to be fully transparent here. Sammy works for me, so she might have an ulterior motive for that question. But if, in all honesty, it should be reviewed constantly, because of our threat changing landscape is changing all the time. Threats are going to be different this month than they are next month, but the fundamentals aren't going to be. So basically, on a fundamental level, your risk acceptance that you're putting in place and getting buy-off from your organization should at least be done on an annual basis, at least. But everything that's more detailed, like the threat levels itself, that one should be done more often. And I would suggest it's not necessarily at the higher levels. It should be something that's established through a risk governance committee that has stakeholders through the organization. Let them look at what you're saying is a risk and let them have their input into, yes, we believe that is a risk and we're not willing to take it. I have actually seen it work really well, and that's kind of what we're starting to implement at Florida Cancer. Because the last thing I want is to implement a security control, and inside healthcare, you can implement a security control and you can cause a lot of problems, even down to a life-threatening situation. So you got to be really careful about how you implement security controls. You can't do that with just your security team. That's where a governance committee comes into play. So I've got a stakeholder, say in radiology, I've got a stakeholder in the radiology group that's going to come in, and they're going to be on this committee. And when we start talking about risk to the radiology area, they're hearing it. And what we're trying to do is let them be, I will be transparent to them of what we're getting ready to do. And they can tell us feedback, well, that's going to impact our workflow here. So then we get into a dialogue. Well, what can we do to mitigate this risk to an acceptable level? But I think risk should be, your risk levels and acceptance of levels should be constantly reviewed. Yep. Over here. While we're waiting for that, I was, one of the interesting things I was running across too that I've started asking when I'm out is, I was in the military sector for a while, and then I went into healthcare. And healthcare sector is still a complete mess, but not like it used to be. It's getting better. But what I noticed inside the healthcare was all my pushback from a cyber program always came from my IT department. Wasn't coming from my users in the organization, wasn't coming from those groups, because quite frankly, they were glad we were there and they were happy for us to be securing what they're doing. They really are. But my IT department was my pushback area. So I wanted to know if this was common. So I started asking questions of people that are working in cyber in different sectors. I did that today. I don't know if he's in the room or not, but I asked him. There he is. I asked him, and your field was critical infrastructure. And I asked you, what was your pain point? Who's the pain point in your organization? What group is your pain point? And came back to the OT, the Operational Technology Group, which is part of IT. I mean, it's the IT people of OT. And then I've asked other people in different areas too, what is your pain point? Ultimately, everybody comes back and says our biggest pain point in our users is always our technology people. They don't want to do something because they are afraid they're going to cause interruptions in their organization. So that goes to show why we as security professionals need to be helping our partners in the IT side instead of just pushing it over the wall and saying, here's your issue. We need to be helping them fix that issue and providing them recommendations on what needs to be done. And in some cases, I'm not even opposed to, hey, my SOC guy that found this problem, go over to them and work with them to fix the problem. If they're having struggles with it, go help them with it. And I'm finding more often than not, they're open to that. And if I go to the director over that area, they're open to having me send extra help over too. Everybody's wanting extra help. And if we have the expertise to do it, we need to be doing it. Yep.
Yeah, I want to get your experience with how you've been able to leverage, or whether you've been able to leverage compliance programs such as PCI or HIPAA to drive that maturity in your technology organization.
But in healthcare, it's really easy to drive HIPAA. I mean, that one's almost a driver by itself. PCI, I'll be honest with you on PCI world. Well, and before I even make this statement, let me ask this question. Who all in here has to be PCI compliant? And what's the reason why you have to be PCI compliant? Because you're doing financial transactions with credit cards and stuff, and that's where that comes from, right? So let me ask you this question. Have any of you heard any organization that did not do HIPAA or did not do PCI compliance properly, that the credit card company came in and ripped it out from you? Right? I've never heard of one. They may threaten you, but you got to think about this. If they pull it out, they're losing money. So my whole point on PCI, every time I've gone to an organization that's asked me, well, what are you going to do about our PCI compliance? I'm like, look, I'm in healthcare. My main goal is HIPAA, because I can guarantee you there have been fines in healthcare organizations because you violated HIPAA. I'm not worried about PCI. If I'm doing things properly in my HIPAA side and I got a good security program, chances are I'm pretty much covered in everything I need to do with PCI. So I'm hesitant about some of these requirements that are going on out there. That's just me. Please don't think I'm advocating letting PCI go. I'm not. That's just me when it comes to PCI, because I can also say this. You all that know PCI, and I've read their requirements, their latest version, if you implemented everything in there, you'd never get anything done. You'd have that thing locked down so much, nobody could do work. All right, next question.
We have a virtual question on the screen.
How do you feel about using more robust enterprise risk quantification processes? You know, one of the hardest things that I've found in my career when it comes to risk is how do you quantify it and how do you qualify it? And I think that's a very difficult that's a very difficult thing to do. But I think if you come up with a really good, robust way of doing it and it works for you, I'm all for it. If you can come and prove to me that how you derived that risk makes sense, then I'm all for it. I don't think there's any one set way of risk quantification. I think it's more important that when you have it identified, who are you taking it to in your organization and letting them have their say on it? Because I can also say this when it comes to risk. You can have a really good risk program, but if you're not taking the information out that's being derived or pulled, extracted out of your program, and you're not taking it to the executive levels or the board levels so they see it, it means nothing. That's a hard thing to say, but it really does mean nothing because they're the ones that ultimately are going to have to either accept that or not. And if they're not getting your information and something happens, what are they going to do? Number one, that's why CISOs get let go real quick. They're the scapegoats because they didn't communicate what the real risk level was to senior leaders. So inside our risk program, we actually are putting in place that when we finally get to the point where we are identifying what risk levels we're setting, we're having that risk governance committee to go through and document this is the risk level of this particular area that we're not willing to go above. So when we do quantify it, if it goes above that level, we can take it to the governance board and say, it went above this level, we've already agreed that we're not willing to do this. And that's what we've got to do and get it very well defined. If you have a poorly defined risk level that you're willing to accept, then you really don't have a risk program going on.
Okay, actually, we are out of time, so thank you so much. Mm-hmm. That was an amazing presentation. I know there were other questions that you wanted to ask, but Dave is going to be here till the end of the day because he's agreed to moderate the panel for us. So you can find him in the hall or in the vendor room. So right now we're going to take a break, and we have to get back here at 1:45. We're going to do another spinning wheel to get you back. So dessert is in the vendor room, and don't rush the door yet. Take your bingo card and go to talk to the vendors, get them to sign your card so you can turn it in at the end of the day. And that's it. We'll see you back here at 1:45.